Okay, good morning. See, there's at least a couple of you here, so good morning, Dynamite. Good morning, Justin. Good morning, anyone who is here, but I can't see your name in the chat. Hopefully, everyone's had a good start to your week. So I'm gonna start like I normally do, which is to just. Good morning, Justin. I'm gonna take a look at the home page and just remind us all what's going on, and then I want to talk a little bit about the group or the team project to get you started. So just start on the home page in Canvas. Morning, Tim. So let's see. To update you on how much content I've created at this point, I've finished through week 13. And this afternoon, I expect I will finish week 14. So I'm getting pretty close to having your entire semester's content posted for you in Canvas so that you can look ahead or work ahead or do whatever you want with that content, that it'll be there when you're ready for it. Okay, but I want to give you some tips about the team project. And my view in Canvas that I see as an instructor is slightly different than your own. So you're going to have some things on your screen that I don't have. So hopefully you can find those things. But let me click on this team project. So I've had, Canvas has a feature where I can create small groups, small teams of students to work on a project. So you don't see it on my screen, but on your screen, you should, in the gray bar to the left, see a groups button. And if you click on that button, you should discover that you have a team that you've been assigned to for Team Project 1 in Canvas. As a member of a team, your whole team, all of its members, you actually have your own sort of area in Canvas where you have a discussion board, you can create pages. What I imagine is, how I hope that you will use Canvas is that you will communicate with each other. You will all be contributing your ideas to the final product for Team Project 1, which I'll show you here in a second. If you haven't done a team project before, there is a video overview. So I put right at the top of Team Project 1, there's a video overview to walk you through from the student's view of how groups or teams work inside of Canvas. And hopefully it gives you enough to get started. If you find that there's something confusing about the teams or the groups, please let me know, because I don't actually have a good way, which is a huge flaw in Canvas, but I actually cannot go in there and see what it looks like from your perspective. I have a student view, but that does not allow me to access groups, unfortunately. So there is a video overview. You should see in the gray bar on the left a link to groups, which will show you your Team Project 1 group for this class. And if you go into the group, you'll find that you have an area of Canvas that you control within your group, which hopefully will allow you to communicate. If you don't like the way Canvas does group communications, you can always use Piazza and just use a discussion board for your group as you work on this project. Now, my hope is it's not super difficult, especially if you have a group of you kind of helping each other work through whatever challenges you find. So the goal of Team Project 1 is to expose you to a different Linux distribution. I just feel like, in my own experience, I gained more confidence the more different Linuxes I tried, and the more I realized that the same skills that I used on the command line in one Linux are exactly the same as every other Linux. So I actually enjoyed learning that back when I was sort of first experimenting on Linux. So what your team will do is you'll work together to choose a distribution. Hopefully you do that democratically and give everyone a chance to have their input. And remember, I did a poll as a discussion in week 2 or week 3, so you can go in there and get some ideas about what people seem to prefer in terms of distributions. But your team will pick a distribution. Hopefully all of you will download and install a virtual machine of that distribution. It's not technically required, but it's hopefully an enriching part of the experience would be to download another distribution and know you can do that, and then use your skills inside of that distribution. Hopefully you'll draw on some of the ideas that we've shared here together about sort of how to run experiments. You'll create an account, of course. You'll kind of poke around and see what software was pre-installed when you loaded up the system, and you'll discover maybe things that aren't there that you're used to having. So anyway, hopefully you will use the distribution a little bit to see what it feels like to work inside of it. And then finally, you'll come together as a group and produce a short report, and I'm going to show you a format for that. So it may take a little bit, so the time to start is sooner than later. So start poking around and seeing what the group area or the team area looks like in Canvas, and start communicating with each other. Work together to choose a distribution, work together so that hopefully each of you and your team does an installation of it. Then you may be able to go off separately and perform whatever experiments you prefer to perform. And then finally, you'll come together and put together a short report about the experience. I have offered, I have included a link to one article that talks a little bit about the kinds of things you might consider when you're choosing a distribution. Now, if you're an IT professional and you go out into the world, then it's your use cases that are going to matter, right? So if you are working for an employer and they need a web server, that may lead you to choosing a Linux distribution over a distribution you might choose if you have an employer who would love to use it for their desktop, or if they just want to run the database in the office, or if they want to use it for firewalling. There's 1,000 different things they might want to do with the distribution. So this article is really just here. If you're training up to be an IT professional, or you already are one, then you're probably aware of these issues. But the things that people consider when they choose a distribution, which may or may not influence your team's choice. Okay, so that's kind of the goal. You choose a distribution, you install a distribution, you play around with it a little bit, and then you come together and you write a report. Now I have provided a template here. Let's see how it works. Now I did it as plain text, which is kind of the Linux or the Unix way to do it. So this is the same template on both team projects. So you'll just sort of fill in the template. So who are your team members? Basic information about the distribution your team chose and what version they chose. The URL of the home page for that distribution. So this template kind of tells you all of the basic information I'm looking for. That's the stuff in all capital letters. And then maybe you can sort of divide up the workload among your team so that each of you is given a small research project. So for example, what are the minimum hardware requirements of your distribution? What package management system does it use? Does it have, what does its schedule look like for doing security updates or software patches? What do you get for free with it? Like what's pre-installed? Then there's a section about is your distribution designed with a particular application in mind? Is your distribution made really for people on the desktop? Was it made for people who are interested in doing pen testing or firewalling or database applications? Whatever it is, that's a little bit of research to do on your distribution. And then finally, the last section is really just what did your team members think of the experience? Like, oh, it was terrible to install. We all struggled with that. Or we loved the software that it came with, and the graphical desktop was the best one we've seen. And It just seems really user-friendly, those kinds of things. So the last section is really each of you contributing your own impressions of the experience of installing and then working a little bit in that distribution. So I hope that makes sense to everybody. It's a way in part to capture the working together experience that we would have had if we were in a classroom. We would have done some of these things in the lab together, install distributions. So it's meant to capture that, and it's also meant to give you an opportunity to go out and explore other distributions. I no doubt there's some of you who are already doing this, installing different distributions or using them at work. So this might be a chance for you to sort of talk your teammates into exploring a distribution that you've always been curious about. Okay, so that's what the team project looks like. And the part that I can't show you very well is groups again, because I have no way of viewing that. I hope that this link at the very top of the project with the video overview helps you figure out kind of where to go to get to talking with each other. But if you're struggling with it, please let me know. If you need to just move into Piazza once you've figured out who your team members are, there's no requirement that you use Canvas to communicate with each other or that you create anything other than the final report. So whatever happens between you communicating with your team members and you producing the final report, that's up to the members of your team to do that as you see fit, what is most comfortable for you. Okay, so I'll come back to that. Hopefully that's at least enough to get you to go look at it and start clicking on some links and figuring out where the groups are and and who are the members of your group. I think some groups are 4 and a few groups are 5 maybe. So if your group for some reason looks like it's going to drop below 3, please let me know and I'll become an additional member of your group, or I will shuffle people around to balance out the groups a little bit. Okay, that's a fairly complicated thing to start out with. But please go look at the project, see if you can figure out the groups part. This is not due until November 8th, I think. Yeah, so you have a long time, but the sooner you sort of figure out where things are and what needs to be done, at least you have that in mind, and then you can start reaching out to the members of your team and talking with them or communicating with them. Okay, so that's team project 1. I'm going to go back to the home. So that's the 2 big things to let you know that I've published material through week 13, week 14 today, I hope. And then I'll have 2 weeks to go, 15 and 16, which I expect I'll finish this week. Week 17 is an exam week, so there's no regular content. The whole week is just the final exam. The same as week 9, by the way. There's no regular content in week 9, it's just the midterm exam. So you can focus on that. Okay, we are in week 5. So VI is necessary this week, and the reason why it's necessary is because it's a lot easier to get a feel for how these commands work if you have some files with content inside of them to run these commands against. Now I'm going to step through the module first, and let's just see what's before us, and then I'll go into my virtual machine and we'll start running some experiments. Alright, so we're doing sort of text manipulating tools. Some of you already know this because you have a little bit of background or maybe a lot of background in Linux, but Linuxes and Unixes are very text oriented. So most of what happens inside of a Linux system, configuration data, the raw data of the system itself, like the files you create, most of what happens on a Linux system is plain text. So it has a whole bunch of utilities that are oriented toward working with plain text. VI is a good example of that. VI's job is to allow you to edit plain text. The power of that in a Unix system is that most of the configuration of a Unix system is plain text. So changing the configuration of a Unix system or a Linux system is really about editing plain text. And monitoring a Linux or a Unix system, like looking at user logs and usage data, things like that, that's all plain text. So there's a lot of tools inside of Linux that allow you to view, edit, manipulate, sort, all kinds of different things with plain text, because most of the information in a Linux system is in plain text. We've already kind of done, I think, some of the VI operations last week, so this week is kind of just reiterating the basic things that you need to actually do editing in VI. Those are the things. Oh, and then a reminder about using man pages. So not everything has a man page, but most things have a man page. And I'm going to poke around in them while we're talking here today. But if you're sitting at home, it's usually actually a good place to just start. Just bring up the man page for a new utility or command and get a sense of what it is. I'll show you that today, the things that I look for and how I play with new commands. Okay, so the readings. You may not have noticed this because this is a change that I made since last week, actually, that I forgot to tell you about. I noticed when I sat down on Sunday to work on some content for this class that all of the PDFs for the books were offline. So the website that hosts all of our PDF books was offline for I don't know how long over the weekend. So what I did is I went out and I got the PDFs and I put them up on my own website. So if you find that the main links to the readings don't work, the mirror links are here as copies of those exact same things on my own website. Now, it's not impossible that my website goes down, but hopefully if mine's on an Amazon Elastic Cloud server, so the odds that it goes down are pretty low, and certainly the odds that it stays down are very low. So anyway, if the books aren't coming up, if the links seem broken, it may be because the website that hosts them is down. Try the mirror link, and you'll see that I've gone and I put those mirror links everywhere at this point, because I didn't want you to go in and discover, oh, the readings aren't here. Okay, so the lab assignment, and I am going to use this to bring up the hands-on experiment so I can kind of show you what I did and sort of how I did. So how did I play around with these commands when I was writing your questions? So I'm going to pop that open in a new tab. So the lab is the same as always, 20 questions. They are written out of the textbook material. So most of the time I try, as best as I can anyway, I try to make the wording sort of read the same or similar to the PDF readings that you're doing. That way when you're reading, you sort of immediately notice that, oh, that's the thing that he's asking about. Okay. The Piazza discussion. So this week is a kind of a week off week. So I don't want this to become too much of a grind. I do enjoy your class's discussions because you're doing all kinds of, a lot of you are doing really neat research and adding new content for us all to share in the class. So appreciate that if you do it. But this week is kind of a week off. It's just a poll to go make a vote in. But it is kind of an IT thing. Like there's a lot of coffee drinkers in IT, that kind of stuff. Anyway, it's just a vote. It's just here to give you a week off. But keep the routine of checking on Piazza and see what's been going on in there. And then finally the reminders. So there's no reminder here in week 5 about the team project. But the reminders for the team project are going to start coming up pretty soon. I just thought I'd bring it to your attention so that you would, some of you at least would take the opportunity to go have a look at it. Okay, that's that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go look at my own hands-on experiments. I may not do exactly these same things, but I'll do similar things and just kind of explain to you why I did that as part of my experiment. So you'll often see when you go to the hands-on experiments link, that links off of the, let me go back. So the hands-on experiments link from the lab assignment. So when you first hit the lab assignment, it'll tell you at the bottom that maybe it might help you if you see my experiments before you start answering the questions. So every lab from here on out is going to have hands-on experiments. But really what that is as I'm writing your questions and I'm trying stuff out on my CentOS system, to make sure it works like I think it's going to work. These are the results of that. So I created 4 files, and I created them so that I could do experiments with specific commands in Linux. Hopefully these aren't too small and too fuzzy for you, but at least if you can get the idea that this is not part of the assignment, of course. These are just showing you, trying to give you some help as to, like, what should I do to do these experiments? Well, for me, it's usually create a bunch of files with stuff in them and then run experiments. And then, no, I didn't. Did I list what commands we're talking about? I did. Head, tail, less, word count, compare, and diff. I'm going to go write those down in my notes. So I don't forget. Head, tail, word count, comp, diff, and I think there was less in there. Yeah, and I guess sort and unique come up next week. I badly want to do sort, but I didn't do it in my command, so I guess that's where I stopped doing that. We might add some bonus commands while we're talking, because those are kind of fun to work with. Okay, so that was me a lot of talking, so now hopefully I'll slow down a little bit as we start to produce some content and explore some commands. I'm going to try to not go super fast, but I'm also going to not go super slow. So it's just sort of a tip for future weeks if you sit in with me live, or if you're about to sit down and watch this video later. You might find it useful to bring up the hands-on experiments and punch in these files before you start listening to me talk. That way you can kind of fast forward through the sections where I actually make the files. But I am going to go right now and I'm going to start making some of these files. After we poke around on the system and I talk a little bit about where you might find yourself using these things. So let me bring up my CentOS system. Sorry, occasionally you're going to see breadcrumbs that I've left behind from as I'm developing materials for your class. I'm doing things in my shell, and occasionally you'll see signs of that. Okay, so we're going to talk about the head and the tail commands. So I'm going to use bring up the man page for the head command and just talk a little bit about what it is that we tend to look for when we're reading these things. So the head command outputs the first part of files, and by the first part it means the top. So if you want to see just the top portion of a file, the head command will help you do that. When you're reading these, the synopsis section, some of you will already know this, but if you're new to it, the synopsis will generally tell you what do you type in after you type the head command. And when you see things in the synopsis in square brackets, that means it's optional. And when you see dots, that means one or more of these is possible. So what this is saying is 0 or more options and 0 or more files. Now it's rarely going to make sense to use the head command without at least a file, but I wanted you to sort of have a sense of how you read these man pages. So square brackets means you don't have to type any of that on the command line if you don't want to. So you can literally just type the head command, and what it's going to do is kind of do this weird interactive top of the file thing. I've never found that useful. There probably are people out there who could tell you why it's useful, but I've never found it useful. So I type the head command with 0 or more options, and a file, 0 or more files to do the head command on plus the options. All right, so let's keep reading and see what else we can learn. Print the first 10 lines of each file to standard output. So that's useful information. By default, head is going to print out the first 10 lines. So let's go do one and then come back to the man pages. So first what I'm going to do is I'm going to type head, and do you notice how it's just sitting there? So watch. I'm going to do 1, 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. You see, that's not useful. The way you get out of this, by the way, is you can do Control C or Control D. I did Control D. So that's this weird interactive mode for head. Where head is a lot more useful, though, is looking at big files of stuff. So I'm going to show you where's a good place to go looking for big files. So I'm going to use the change directories command, and I'm going to do absolute path starting at root, and I'm going to go to the var directory. So you probably don't remember this detail, but in the file system hierarchy standard for Linux, the FHS, the standard says that this /var folder usually has things that include system logs, as an example. So I'm going to cd into there, and so now I'm in /var. I'm going to do a listing here, and there's a subdirectory called log, so I'm going to go into there. So now I'm in var log. Now the reason I came here is because this log folder usually has big files, and they're good for doing experiments when you need a big file to do an experiment on. I'm actually going to do a long listing here, and the reason I'm doing a long listing is because I want to see which files are biggest, because those are likely to be the files that have the most lines in them for my head and tail experiments I'm about to run. So there's a bunch of log files in here. Firewall log, this is I think a software installation log. This last log is not actually plain text viewable. It's keeping track of the last time the user's logged into the system. But I do know that these librepo logs are quite big. So let's do a couple of things. First thing is I'm going to use the cat command and try to explain the difference of these commands. So what the cat command does, it stands for concatenate, which I don't think is helpful. But what the cat command does is it basically dumps the entire contents of a file on the screen. And if it's a long file, then they just go racing by. So let's do a long one. Like, well, let's just do dn. So if I cat dnf.librepo.log, that should be a long file. What cat's going to do is just dump the whole thing, and it's going to go streaming by on the screen. Oh, permission denied. Surely I can read some of these. Oh, let's look at permissions. I can do the next one down. I think I can do this one. 0906. Yeah, there's. So let me do a long listing again. So this is a little bit ahead of us, but I got a permission denied on librepo.log, And the reason was that there wasn't an R in this column over here. So if there's an R in this column, that means that I have permission to read it. So when I got a permission denied, what I did is I quickly glanced over here and I noticed that this column is blank, which means that I don't have permission to read it. So I just scanned down until I found a file that I do have permission to read, like this one. This 2020-09-06 log, I can read. So that's what happened. Anyway, so I'm going to use the cat command, log / 2020-09-06. This is the cat command, and what I want you to notice is that this super long file just goes flying on by until all of its contents have been barfed onto the screen. Woof. So whatever happened way up here, gone. So that's cat's job though. Cat works great for little tiny files because it'll barf the whole file out on the screen, but it fits on the screen because it's a little tiny file. Cat is not the greatest for super long files. So a better command for super long files would be something like head. So if I type head and give it this file name, it's going to show me the first 10 lines of the file. So they're long lines, but that's the first 10 lines of the file. This is a log of me doing software installations on this system at some point. So that's the first 10 lines. So you can sort of immediately see how head can be more useful than cat, because cat, just a stream of all the file until it runs out. Head, just the first 10 lines by default. So let me bring up the man page again. So we just saw that. Print the first 10 lines, and I used that log file because I knew it was going to be long, and it would help it make more sense what I was doing. Okay, so we can also tell head to give us the first certain amount of bytes. I've never used it that way, but you could. I do use the -n option or the -- lines equals option. So -n and -- lines equals, that's one of the options you can use. So let's look at this with both options, with both ways of doing the line number option. Q to quit the man page. So I'm going to cycle back to my head command. All right, so what it tells me is if I put a -n, and then you have to learn how to read this, but if I say 3, the number of lines I'm going to get from the top of the file is going to be the first 3. So there's the first 3 lines. Generally, you can make that out because each line starts with a date stamp. So there's 1 date stamp, 2 date stamps, 3 date stamps. So that's the line number option. Now it told me that another way I can type that is like that. So that's a same way of expressing the same option that I want to see 3 lines. I personally would never type it this way because it takes longer to type. But it does, at least you can read it easier if you see it this way. So same result, right? Let's see if there's any other interesting options down here. Not really. There's a help. There's a verbose mode, there's a quiet mode. I mean, we could try it and just see what it does. So I'll go back to this one with no, so let's just go into verbose mode. Alright, so verbose mode I think may have added this piece at the top. I will try it in quiet mode and see if it takes away that little piece at the top. Yeah, there you go. So quiet mode took away the little piece at the top. Let's see what the default was. So the default is quiet mode. Verbose mode adds this little tag at the top that tells you what file you're viewing the head of. So that's the head command. It can be handy for poking around inside of big log files. So for example, whenever you start a web server, let's say the web server is going to spit out information into a log file as it is spinning up. And if something goes wrong while your web server is spinning up, you could use the head command to go view the top of the web server's log file and see if you can find what went wrong as that service was starting up. If you're a programmer type, these commands may be of less use to you, but if you're an IT admin, then super useful. Its partner is the tail command. So tail outputs the last part or the bottom of files, and it's basically operates in mostly the same way with one super awesome option that is hard to show you on a standalone virtual machine like this, but I'll show you kind of and talk about it. So output the last part or the bottom, print 10 lines by default. If you don't give it any options or any files to tail on, it's going to do that weird interactive mode, which I don't find all that useful. Has the same -n option. It does have a couple of options if we arrow down and look. Tail has more options in it, probably because tail is a lot more useful than head. Not that head's not useful, but tail I've used a lot more. And I'll try to explain why. Some of these options are there, but not all of them. So let's do tail on that same file. So it was actually I'm just going to go back and I will save myself typing that and just say tail. So that's the last 10 lines of that same file. We can also say I only want to see the last, let's say 3 lines, or maybe I want to see the last 15 lines of the file, which is kind of pushing it. And it also supports the same -- lines equals option. And then the last thing I'll tell you, we're not going to be able to see it, but if you can get on a multi-user system and try this out, this is where you'll really appreciate the value of it, because you need a system that's sort of actively being used by multiple people, but I'll try to explain it. So tail has an option. I'm going to do a thing. Should I do this thing? No, I'm not going to do it. Will I do it? I might do it. But let me explain it first, and then I'll decide if I should do this more complicated example. Tail has an option called follow. In fact, let me just use this one. Tail has an option called follow. One of the coolest things about this, probably the best thing about this command. Follow, what that does is it actually opens, it loads up the last 10 lines of the file. I did the last, where did the command go? Wherever I typed it. Anyway, it loads up the last part of the file, but what the follow does is if changes happen to that file in real time, you actually see that change happening with the follow. Let me do a Control-C to quit this. So I did follow. So here's the last 10 lines of the file. And I'm following it, which means that if anything happens in real time that causes a log entry to be made in this file, I will see that happen. Now this is really good for things like denial of service attacks on a web server is an example. You could watch, you could tail follow your web server's log file, and you can see the attacks in progress and where they're coming from. So it's a super cool option. If you find yourself on a multi-user system where things are actually happening, the follow option is a really cool feature of tail. If none of that made sense to you, don't worry tons about it. Tail is how you view the bottom of a file. But if you're an IT admin, tail follow, super powerful for watching what's happening on your system in real time as the logs are actually changing in real time. Control C to get out of there. That's tail. All right, so what we looked at here is, I'm going to cheat because I don't want to type that long name in. We looked at cat, so I will add that to my little notes here. Which means concatenate, but what that is it's just a file dump. So it dumps the entire contents of that file onto the screen. The downside of cat is that if the file is super long, then all of it just the top of it just races by. We looked at head, which by default will show you the top 10 lines of the file, but you can also use the -n option to view just a smaller amount, or more if more than 10 is what you want, but usually it's less than 10, might be what you're doing. So first 10. Tail is another option, which lets you view the last lines in a file. So I was just checking chat to make sure I didn't leave any questions unanswered. Okay. And then we'll add 2 more to this, although technically I only asked you about 1 of them. So sometimes you do want the ability to sort of scroll through a document. So the downside to head and tail is that they really are only just going to give you that subset, the top 10 or the bottom 10 or the top 5 or the bottom 5. Cat is just going to go screaming by. Sometimes though you do want the whole file and you want to sort of slowly work your way through it. There's 2 commands that do that, and I don't want to retype that file name. So one of them is called more, and what more does is it'll load the top of the file and then it will stop when it gets to the end of the screen and wait for you to advance manually. So I've got 5% of that file loaded onto my screen, and now I can use, I think it's just the enter key, yeah. I can use the enter key and kind of slowly work my way down the file. To see what's going on the system in terms of this log. So that's the more command. But more is kind of limiting. We can do man more. So that sounds fancier than what it is. File perusal filter for CRT viewing. It just means it loads up the file and lets you page down through the entire document. It does have options, so if you're experimenting, I recommend you try options just to see what they do. But more could be more. It could be better. This is great. I got the whole file loaded in here, and I can use the enter key to page down. Now I'm hitting Q to quit. But there's a better command for this, and it's called less. So the joke is that less is more. And it's clever, but less is a better more, if that makes sense. So let me show you how that works. So here's less. Its job is basically the same. Loads up the whole file and then lets me, I can use the arrow key to page down, the enter key, but I can also now use the arrow keys in less. Less also lets me go back up. Like, oh wait, I missed a thing at the top. I can actually arrow all the way back up to the top of the document, which is pretty cool. So I'm just using the arrow up and down arrow keys. So this is a way that less is a better file viewer than more. It doesn't let you edit text or anything. Its whole job is just to let you read a file. And a typical use would be that you're reading a log file on a live system somewhere. But there's another cool thing that less will do. If you hit the /, which I don't know how it's going to look to you, but this / down here, you can actually do a search. So I can say, does Vim appear anywhere in these logs? I hope that it does. I think that it does. Let's find out. Nope. Does SSH appear anywhere in these logs? It does. So less will actually let you do a search and it will take you to matches. So here's a bunch of SSHs and notice they're highlighted. I still now have the power to go up and down around that section of the document. Pretty cool. So slash lets you search down. It also has a question mark. You see it down here in the lower left-hand corner of the screen. You can search up. So I can say, is that string base OS anywhere up there? And if it is, it will take me back up to the last place that it can be found. And then I still have my arrow keys where I can move up and down. So less is a much better version of more, in my opinion, and in most people's opinion. We can do a man page for it. So see, they jokingly call it the opposite of more. It's not actually the opposite of more, it's just better than more. And if you read the description, less is a program similar to more, but which allows backward movement in the file as well as forward movement. It also lets you do searches and stuff, so it's pretty cool. I use less a lot on big files. So less, again, is when you want to look at what's in a file and you don't care about editing it or anything like that. You just, sometimes you need to pop open a log file if you're an admin and see what's happening on your system. Less is good for that. That is less. Okay. We're going to do one more system file, and then we'll go create some of our own files to run some experiments on. It's taking longer than I thought, but now I'm going to go to the etc. folder. So I'm using the change directories command. I am using the absolute path to /etc, etc. So now I'm in etc, and if I do a listing, there's a bunch of stuff in here. So let me show you a trick. So you notice when I do an ls, it kind of just dumps the whole listing and it just screams on past, and I know that I missed out on stuff up there. Well, you can actually use the less command. So this is a vertical bar, a pipe, we would call it in the shell. So if I say ls pipe, and that character is above the enter key on your keyboard. So if you look under your right hand, just above that enter key is the pipe. So ls space pipe space less will actually load the listing into less, and now I can up and down in it. So less can be handy sometimes just because you have a folder that has so much stuff in it that unless you paginate it with less, it's just going to scream on past you. So there's an application of less. You can also, by the way, do, you can pipe the listing into head and get just the first 10, or pipe the listing into tail and get the last 10. You can also pipe through more. The only problem with more, of course, is that you can't go up. You can only go down. Okay, but what I want here is, on this screen, it's the password file as we move into the next command. So I'll just kind of show you how my brain works. So I want to see what's in there. So I'm already in the etc. folder. So I want to cat the password file. Now there's no actual passwords in here. When you see these X's, we call that a shadow password system. So the passwords actually are encrypted on this system. And that X is, in the old days, where your password would have been on a Unix system right up there in the open, in plain text. But for a long, long time now, they've encrypted them and they just sort of leave a little placeholder. So those X's is sort of the placeholder for the encrypted password for each of those users. What this password file has in it is actually a listing of all the user accounts on there, on your system. So a lot of these accounts are actually associated with services that are running on your system. But you can see your user, at least my user account way down here. It has your username, a placeholder for your encrypted password, which is somewhere else, your user ID, the ID of your primary group, which these are going to make more sense when we talk about permissions, but that's what's in here. That's your proper name. So if you had done this for real, this would say Boyd Trollinger here instead of just user. Then your home directory, and then your shell, the shell program that you use. Notice a lot of these, by the way, they say sbin no login. So those are users who actually they're not regular accounts and they have no ability to log into the system. Notice, by the way, that root can log into the system. Root has a home directory and a shell. But the reason why I brought you here is because I wanted to do the WC command. Yeah, I want to do the WC command in here. Just to show you one sort of quick application before we look at other applications of it. So what the WC command does is it's a counter. So it counts how many new lines, which is a way of saying how many lines are in the file, how many words, and how many bytes are in the file. Here's the synopsis that tells you what is and is not optional. I don't find WC that useful unless there's a file name offered, although it can be piped, I guess. Anyway, print new line, word, and byte counts for each file that you list. And then there's options that allow you to specify pieces, right? So only the words, only a line count, only the actual sort of printable characters, and then the total number of bytes. But I came here because I wanted to show you a trick. So I'm just going to use it on the password file. So that's a lines, words, and bytes. The words is basically what it can detect as being separated from other words, which is usually by a space or a tab character in the file. And you can narrow that down, right? So I can just say how many lines are in there. What's useful about this is that this tells you that there are 27 user accounts in your system. That's why I came here, is just because that would be one sort of simple way to do this. Having people sort of sneak in and create accounts on your system is one sort of old school way, I suppose, of checking the integrity of your system is someone creating accounts you didn't know about somehow on your system. So anyway, that's just a count of the number of lines that are in there, which for the password file kind of translates into the number of accounts that are on your system. We can also do the byte count, not bytes, that goes as a C, doesn't it? Yeah, and then there's also a word count, but we already knew how that was going to work. Okay, so that's the WC command. I'm going to go home. The fastest way to go all the way to your home from anywhere is CD, press enter. But you can also do something like this with WC. So instead of counting how many folders and files I have, I can pipe that to WC. And that tells me I have 17 files and folders in my home directory. Just an application of the WC command. And then I can, if I want, of course, say, well, how many words are in my shop script? 24 words in there. How are we doing on time? I think we're doing okay on time. I at least want to get to talking a little bit about these different files. So, but I'm running out of time, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go into, oh wait, there's some questions come up. Okay, so someone was having a resolution issue. So hopefully that resolved itself. Okay, so I know we're just blasting away. I do have this log here, this list on the right hand side of the commands that we've talked about. So just remember the thing to do is to use the man page and then just run some brief experiments. So I'm going to go into my, I do. So I still have my week 5 folder. So at this stage, if you don't have these files, this will be a little bit fast for you. I apologize for that. So this is based on the hands-on experiments that I did for the week. I'm going to use cat to dump each one of them on the screen. So as opposed to opening them in VI, cat is a much faster way to just see what's in there. I forget. So there's my week 5a.txt command. And the reason why I created this way with the numbers is so that we could use head and tail and be absolutely certain that head and tail were doing what they said they were going to do. So if I do head -n2 on week 5a.txt, that's why the numbers are there, right? That's what it should have been, the first 2 lines, so that's correct. If I do tail -n, let's say 4, then those are the 4 that I would have expected. So the reason why I created that file that way is so the experiments with head and tail would make sense. And you could sort of confirm that, yes, in fact, it is doing what I would expect for it to do. The other thing we can do with it is we can do a line count on it. And it should be 25 because there's 25 lines in it, so that's confirmation. Each line probably has 2 words on it. There's a space, so there's a number and a space. So one thing to note here is that word count, WC is not actually counting English words or spoken words. It's groupings of characters separated by spaces or tabs. So in my file, there's 2 words on every line. There's a number dot and then a space, so that the number and dot is 1 word and the animal name is the 2nd word on every line. So that's why I created that file in that way, is so that I could make some sense of the results I'm seeing as I'm running the commands. Now the other thing that I'm going to do, I'm going to open this one for editing actually. So I'm going to open up week 5b. This is another one of the files that shows on the experiments for the week. So apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, and lemons is the contents of that file. And the first thing I'm going to do, that's week 5b, apples, oranges, bananas, grapes, and lemons. The first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to make a copy of that file, so week 5b.txt, and I'm just going to call it, for now I'm just going to call it copy.txt. So this is a good excuse to practice these commands as well. So copy, make a copy of week 5b.txt, call the copy.txt. Now the reason I did this is because I want to look at the compare, I think it's the compare and the diff functions. So let's use the man page first. So compare compares 2 files byte by byte. So this thing is looking for basically every last little detail about the files. Byte by byte by byte. So let's try it and see what happens. So Q to quit the man page. So I'm going to compare week 5b with the copy of it that I just made, because I want to know what happens if I compare 2 files and they're exactly the same. Nothing happens. That's what we would expect, because they are precisely exactly the same file. So now let's go edit the copy. And let's just change one thing. Let's just take the S off of Apple. The way you do that is with the X key. So I'm in command mode, escape, 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 escape to be in command mode. And then I use the H, J, K, and L. In this case, I'm using the L key to move to the end of the line. And then I'm going to type X while I'm still in command mode. Deletes the character under the blinking cursor. And now I'm going to do :WQ to write and quit. So now I know that there is 1 character difference between those two files. And it says byte number 6, line number 1 is different. So basically the 6th character over something is different. That's where the difference appears. So I'm going to open up that copy again. I'm going to retype my S in. The way you do this at the end of the line, by the way, so if you're at the end of the line and you need to add or append text, use the A key to start typing. And notice I'm in insert mode when I do that. Escape, escape, escape. So experiment with those two things. If I type I, where I start typing is before my blinking cursor. If I type A, where I start typing is to the right, after the blinking cursor. So anyway, I want to put the S back, escape, escape, escape to get in command mode, and then colon WQ to write and quit. And then I did that because I want to run the comparison again. Alright, so they are the same. Now let's look at diff. Well, let's look at, do we want to do that? Yeah, let's look at some that are more dramatically different. So if we look at 5b.txt, I'm going to use cat to dump it, and I'm going to use cat to dump 5c. So those are a little similar, but there's a difference, right? So apples, oranges, so bananas in 5b, strawberries in 5c. Grapes is the same, but where it was lemons in the first file, it's limes. Now the reason I made these two files is because I want to know if I compare two files that are significantly different, what does that look like? So just so you know, you see the difference is that it basically, by default, stops on the first difference that it finds. So its job really is, I take two copies of a file and I want to know if they are precisely the same or somewhere different. The CMP command is a way to do that. Okay, so now let's look at diff. So whereas CMP was a byte by byte comparison, diff is a line by line comparison. Its output is a little bit more complicated, but we'll try it out and just see if we can make some sense of what's going on with it. Q to quit the man page. So if I diff week 5b.txt and what is now the full copy of it, there's no output because they are literally not different. So now I'm going to go back into copy and I'm just going to change one character. I'm just going to take the S off again of apples from the copy, WQ to write and quit. Now if I rerun that diff, alright, so diff is a little bit different because diff actually wants to tell you where and how they are different. So there's a one character difference, but it tells you the difference between the first file, that's the less than file, week 5b, and the second file, the week 5c in this case, what's different about them. So I actually like this one better for this kind of job because it tells me not only if there are differences, but precisely where and what they look like. So that's diff. Let me uncat 5b.txt again and 5c.txt. Those are both in the hands-on experiments so that you can try these for yourself. So again, one file has bananas, the other has strawberries, one file has lemons, the other has limes, and let's see how they diff. So there's diff sort of showing you where and what is different. So that's pretty neat. It's a very useful utility. we use a lot in programming, and probably you'll end up using it in places like shell scripting and stuff as well. So that's diff. It's a way to, it looks line by line at the file and notes the differences and where and how they're different. So that's a really nice utility. Okay, I think I'm running out of time. Sort and unique are the stars next week, I believe, so I'll take those off because we'll do those next week and we'll give them the attention that they're due. They're a lot of fun to play with. I realize that the commands that we use today aren't like fun ones, but they're useful and they're powerful, and they will come back again and again. I'll try to make note of the fact when I use them, because I use them a lot. But sort next week is a fun one, so it will be fun to sort of set it aside and let it have its own week to sort of be the star of the show so we can have more fun with it. There's not a whole lot going on for the VI stuff. It's mostly review. The things I would remind you about is, in fact, I'm just going to type them here. Escape to get back to command mode. Experiment with the I and the A. I is the one that most of us remember first, but I and A both let you start typing text, and you cannot type text into your document unless you are in insert mode. And little I and little A are two of the ways that you do that. So this I is a command. You type it as a command from command mode, which switches you to the insert mode. A is a command, so from command mode, if you type an A, it switches you into insert mode, but where your characters start appearing begins to the right of you as opposed to the left of you. If in doubt in VI, pound on escape to get back into command mode. That's sort of the safe place to be, is command mode, so that if you're typing stuff, it doesn't appear in your document by accident. And then I'll also remind you of these things. The quit exclamation point, Q bang, that's a way to quit without saving. If you did something that messed up your document and you want it back the way it used to be, then Q bang. From command mode. Quit if you didn't make any changes and you're ready to just quit. Write to write or save, and then write and quit, so it will save and quit all in one step. And then the other things are the cursor movement keys, H, J, Q, and L. Takes practice. If in doubt, use the arrow keys. Most of the time they're going to work. I haven't tried it here, but I assume they work. What? Well, let me see. Yeah, arrow keys work. So if you're having trouble just editing text because you can't move around, you have to be in command mode to move the cursor around, unless you're typing and stuff. But generally you're in command mode. Try to get a handle on these, but if it's making you not be productive, just use the arrow keys. The downside of the arrow keys is that you have to lift your fingers off the QWERTY part of the keyboard. So the arrow keys is slower because you have to lift your fingers. If you learn all of the sort of traditional VI commands, you never have to lift your fingers from the keyboard, which is what a lot of us like about it. Okay, I need to call it a day. Thanks for letting me talk at you for so long and being patient about it. I'll give it a couple of minutes. I think everyone's having an okay experience in the class so far. Hopefully that's true. Thanks, Tim. Appreciate it. I hope you all have a good week for the rest of your week. Please have a look at the team project. It's a ways out yet. It's not until November 8th, but having more time to sort of coordinate yourselves and work on it rather than less time can be a good thing. So you might have a look at the team project if you get a moment. The midterm is during week 9. We're in week 5. So after this week, 3 more weeks of content, and then Week 9 is only an exam. There's no homework, there's no lab. I will get on for lecture and do some review for the midterm exam, but the only thing you do on week 9 is the midterm exam. It's got 50 questions on it, and they are all drawn from the first 8 homework assignments. So that's what's coming up. Anyway, thanks for being here, and have a good rest of your week.